In the quiet folds of the Appalachian Mountains, where the morning mist drifts like a living spirit across rolling green hills, there lived a man named Alvin York. Long before the world knew his name, he was simply a son of Tennessee, a humble farmer, a hunter, and a man of faith who believed the soil could teach more than any weapon ever could. His days began before the sun touched the horizon, with the sound of a rooster's call echoing through the valley. The smell of damp earth filled the air as Alvin hitched his horse and began to plow, the wooden blade slicing through the soil with the slow rhythm of life itself. Each morning was the same, yet sacred in its simplicity. York's hands were calloused and strong, his heart calm and disciplined. He worked not for wealth or recognition, but because this was the way life had always been, honest labor, shared among family and guided by faith. The clatter of a wagon wheel on a dirt path, the creak of an old barn door, the laughter of his younger siblings, all these sounds formed the music of his world. When the week's work was done, Sunday brought a gentler peace. Dressed in his best, Alvin would walk down the narrow road to the small wooden church at the edge of the valley. The preacher's voice rose over the hills, speaking of humility, sacrifice, and the will of God. York listened closely. The words stayed with him longer than he could ever have imagined. To those who knew him, Alvin York was a quiet man, loyal, hard-working, unshaken. He hunted in the woods to feed his family, fixed what was broken, and prayed when the storms rolled in. There was nothing extraordinary about him, and yet, somewhere deep within that simple farmer's heart, destiny was waiting. He was a man of the earth, not of war. But the winds of war were already rising far across the ocean, and soon they would reach even the forgotten hills of Tennessee. The year was 1917. Across the Atlantic, Europe was burning, nations swallowed by war, skies filled with thunder not of storms, but of artillery. Yet here, in the quiet hills of Tennessee, Alvin York lived by a different fire, the fire of faith. He belonged to the Church of Christ in Christian Union, a small congregation that preached peace above all things. To York, the Bible's words were not symbols, they were commands written into his soul. "Thou shalt not kill." Those words echoed in his heart every time the world spoke of war. When the letter came, it arrived with the chill of winter. A draft notice, stamped and sealed by the United States government, calling Alvin C. York to fight in a war he did not believe in. He held the paper in his hands for a long time, the ink blurring as his fingers trembled. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. Inside, a single candle flickered beside his open Bible. He stared at the pages, searching for an answer that wouldn't come. York prayed for days. He walked alone through the woods, his boots crunching against frost and fallen leaves. Every thought battled inside him, the pull of duty, the weight of faith. How could a man who believed killing was a sin pick up a rifle in the name of God and country? His friends told him to serve, his conscience told him to stay. Nights passed in silence, only the sound of distant thunder filling the air, like the echo of the world tearing itself apart. One evening, under the dim light of his cabin, York fell to his knees and whispered a prayer. "Lord, what do you want me to do?" His tears hit the floor, mingling with the wax of a dying candle. In that moment, he did not seek glory or courage, only truth. The storm outside grew stronger, rattling the window shutters as if the world itself demanded an answer. For Alvin York, that was the beginning of his war, not against an enemy across the ocean, but within his own soul. Between the man of peace he had always been, and the soldier he was being called to become. When Alvin York finally reported for duty at Camp Gordon, Georgia, the war had already swallowed half the world. The camp buzzed with shouting sergeants, marching boots, and the endless rhythm of discipline. For most men, this was adventure, a chance to wear the uniform, to be part of something greater. But for York, it felt like exile from everything he believed in. He carried his rifle awkwardly, like a burden he never asked for, his eyes downcast as others trained to kill with pride. His fellow soldiers didn't understand him. Some laughed behind his back, others called him a coward. "You can't win a war with prayers, York," they'd sneer. But Alvin never fought back. He only lowered his head and whispered, "A man must obey his God before he obeys any man." Even his instructors grew impatient. How could they trust a soldier who refused to fight? One afternoon, Captain Danforth, the company officer, called him into his tent. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and the weight of unspoken judgment. Danforth studied York quietly before speaking. "I've read your papers, York. You don't believe in killing. Yet you enlisted. Tell me, where does that leave you?" York hesitated, his voice low but steady. "Sir, I don't want to kill no man. But I don't want to run from duty neither. The captain leaned forward. Maybe it's not about wanting. Maybe it's about what's right. The conversation turned into something deeper, not about weapons or tactics, but about faith, morality, and purpose. That night, York couldn't sleep. The words echoed in his mind, twisting like the wind outside. He left the barracks quietly, walking out into the dark Georgia hills. The sky was cold and clear, the moon casting silver light across the trees. He climbed until he could see the camp below, rows of tents glowing faintly in the distance. There, surrounded by silence, York knelt and prayed once more. He asked not for strength to fight, but for wisdom to understand. As dawn broke, light poured through the clouds, washing the forest in gold. And in that stillness, Alvin York felt something shift inside him, a calm, steady voice that said, "Do your duty, but trust in me to guide your hand." When he walked back to camp, the man who returned was no longer torn. He still hated war, but now he carried peace within his heart. In those silent woods, he found his answer that it was 1918, and the ocean lay between everything Alvin York had ever known and the fate that awaited him. The ship that carried his unit creaked and groaned as it cut through dark Atlantic waves, bound for France, a land torn apart by 4 long years of war. The wind howled through the rigging, mingling with the low hum of anxious voices. Some men joked to mask their fear, others stared silently into the endless horizon. York stood among them, his hands resting on the railing, eyes fixed on the gray sky. He thought of home, of green Tennessee fields, his mother's voice, the church bell echoing across the valley. Every mile east felt like another piece of that life drifting away. When they finally reached the French coast, the scent of salt and smoke filled the air. Soldiers unloaded crates, rifles, and dreams of glory that would soon be tested in the mud. The journey from the docks to the front was a blur, villages reduced to rubble, trees splintered like broken matchsticks, and the distant thunder of artillery that never seemed to stop. York's unit joined the 82nd Division, marching through rain-soaked roads toward the trenches of the Meuse-Argonne. The front lines were a world of their own, a place where time froze and hopes sank into the mud. The ground shook beneath their feet, the sky flashed with fire. Rats scurried through flooded dugouts, and the stench of gas and decay clung to every breath. Nights were long and restless, days filled with the constant fear of shells screaming overhead. Yet through it all, Alvin York remained calm. While others cursed, he prayed. When tempers flared, he listened. And when fear took hold, he stood steady, a quiet pillar in the chaos. His steady hands and unshakable patience earned him a quiet respect among the men. They began to see in him something rare, a man who did not need anger to be brave. As weeks passed, the thunder of war became the rhythm of life. The farmer from Tennessee had crossed an ocean, but his heart still carried the peace of home. In the mud and madness of France, Alvin York's true test had only just begun, a test that would soon turn him from soldier into legend. October 1918. The Great War was reaching its breaking point. For weeks, the Allied armies had pushed through the dense forests of northern France, trying to shatter the German lines once and for all. It was called the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, the largest battle the United States would ever fight. More than 1 million American soldiers marched into those mist-covered hills, and among them was Sergeant Alvin York. The morning was gray and heavy with fog. Damp leaves clung to the soldiers' boots as they moved cautiously through the tangled woods. The air smelled of mud and metal. Every sound, a twig snapping, a boot slipping, could mean death. Orders came down the line. York's unit, part of the 328th Infantry Regiment, was to advance through a valley and silence a series of German machine gun nests that had pinned down entire companies. It was a mission that sounded simple on paper, but no map could show the fear waiting beyond the mist. As they crept forward, the distant rumble of artillery grew louder, rolling through the forest like thunder. The fog thickened, swallowing men whole. Communication lines broke down. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Somewhere ahead, hidden among the trees, the Germans waited, their guns poised, their aim already set. York tightened the strap on his helmet, gripping his rifle as his heart pounded beneath his uniform. Around him, men whispered quiet prayers. The first shot cracked through the silence, then another. Within seconds, the forest exploded into chaos. Bullets ripped through branches, the air filled with screams and the metallic scent of blood. Mud flew into the air as shells hit the ground, shaking the earth beneath their feet. The calm of Tennessee was a memory now. This was the storm he had been called into. York shouted orders, trying to hold his men together as they ducked for cover behind fallen trees. The mission was clear, but survival seemed impossible. Each second stretched into eternity. The fog glowed orange from the muzzle flashes ahead, and the once peaceful woods now echoed with the roar of death. What awaited them was not victory, but a storm of lead. The forest erupted without warning. One moment, there was only the sound of boots in the mud, and the next, the world exploded into fire. Machine guns opened up from the ridge ahead, cutting through the fog like lightning. Bullets screamed past, splintering trees, tearing bark into shrapnel. York's platoon dropped to the ground, but it was already too late. In seconds, 9 men were dead, their bodies crumpled among the roots and leaves. The valley turned into a trap. Every direction meant death. The air was thick with smoke and screams. Orders vanished under the roar of gunfire. Men shouted for medics, for help, for God. The stench of cordite burned their lungs. York pressed himself against the earth, heart pounding, mud splashing across his face. Around him, chaos reigned. Rifles clattered empty. Men crawled for cover. The wounded cried out into the endless noise. Pinned down and nearly surrounded, York felt a strange calm wash over him. The world seemed to slow, the deafening sounds fading into a muffled hum. He looked at the fallen men beside him, friends, brothers, men who trusted him. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, his lips barely moving. Lord, show me the way. For a moment, time stopped. When he opened his eyes, something inside him had changed. The fear was still there, but beneath it, there was purpose. York adjusted his rifle, checked his pistol, and crawled forward through the mud. He moved with quiet precision, slipping from cover to cover, closer to the flashes of the German guns. Each step brought him nearer to the impossible. Bullets snapped overhead, dirt burst beside him, but he kept going. The farmer from Tennessee, who once refused to fight, now faced an army alone. He sighted the first machine gun nest and squeezed the trigger. One shot, then another. The rhythm of war took over, steady, deliberate, unshaken. As the Germans fired blindly into the mist, York advanced. Every pull of the trigger was a prayer. Every fallen enemy, a grim necessity. Around him, the valley burned with fury, but within him, there was only silence, the kind that comes when a man accepts his fate. The ambush that began with terror now shifted toward something no one could have imagined. Alone against the storm, Alvin York had decided to act. The valley had fallen silent, but it wasn't peace. It was the breath before another storm. Alvin York moved through the fog like a ghost, his rifle tight against his shoulder, mud clinging to his uniform. Each heartbeat echoed louder than the gunfire. Ahead of him, German machine guns still flashed through the smoke, their barrels glowing red from constant fire. Around him, his comrades lay still, some dead, others too wounded to move. There was no one left to lead, no one but him. York crouched behind a fallen log, took a deep breath, and sighted the first nest. One clean shot, the gunner dropped. Another shot, the loader fell beside him. He shifted positions, invisible in the mist, the forest swallowing his movements. Years of hunting in the Tennessee hills had trained him for this moment. Patience, aim, and precision. Back home, he hunted to feed his family. Here, he hunted to save them. The Germans fired blindly, their bullets slicing through empty air. York advanced again, closer, calm, deliberate. When his rifle emptied, he drew his pistol, moving like a shadow between bursts of fire. Each shot found its mark. The battle became a rhythm, the click of the bolt, the whisper of breath, the fall of another enemy. At one point, a group of German soldiers charged him with bayonets. York spun, dropping them one by one, his movements sharp and mechanical, his eyes filled with quiet resolve. By the time the smoke began to clear, the ground around him was littered with silence. He had single-handedly killed 25 enemies, forcing the rest to surrender. From the ridge above, stunned German officers watched as the man they thought was just another soldier ordered 132 prisoners to stand and march. Alone, surrounded by chaos, Alvin York had done the impossible, turning the tide of an entire battle with nothing but faith, skill, and courage. As he led the captured men back through the valley, the sound of war faded behind him, replaced by the steady rhythm of his footsteps in the mud. No cheering, no victory cry, just the weight of what had been done, and the quiet truth of what it had cost. In that valley, one man changed the course of a war. The valley that once roared with thunder was now silent, except for the sound of boots trudging through the mud. Alvin York walked at the front, his rifle slung over his shoulder, leading a column of 132 captured German soldiers. Behind him, disbelief followed every step. His own men stared as if they were seeing a ghost. one man bringing back an entire enemy line. When York reached the U.S. command post, the officers rushed out, stunned. They counted the prisoners again and again, unable to believe what they were seeing. A single corporal, not a general, not a hero by name, had just done what entire companies had failed to do. Reporters wrote of the Tennessee woodsman who tamed a valley of fire. Commanders sent cables to headquarters, and soon the story spread across the Atlantic. But York himself said little. When questioned, he only replied softly, "It was no man's doing. It was God's will." Archival photos fade in, York standing among his fellow soldiers, expression calm, eyes lowered. Maps trace the battle site, showing how his act broke through the German line at the Meuse-Argonne, a turning point that helped end the war. Documents with his name, his signature, stamped and dated, October 8, 1918. In 1919, York returned home to a hero's welcome. Crowds filled the streets, bands played his name, and the nation called him its greatest soldier. Yet, when he stood before the Medal of Honor, he didn't raise his fist or shout in triumph. He simply bowed his head. Because for Alvin York, the medals and headlines didn't matter. What mattered were the men who didn't come back, the lives he couldn't save, and the quiet hills of Tennessee that still called him home. He never sought glory. He only did his duty, and became the hero they never expected. The train whistle echoed through the Tennessee Valley as Alvin York stepped back onto the soil he once plowed. The war was over, and the farm boy from the hills had returned as a national hero. Newspapers across America carried his face on their front pages. Crowds lined the streets, waving flags and shouting his name. For a moment, the quiet man from Pall Mall was the most famous soldier in the world. But fame never sat easily on his shoulders. Reporters wanted interviews, movie studios sent offers, politicians called him a symbol of courage. York listened politely, then turned them all down. He had seen enough of glory. The medals on his chest were heavy reminders, not trophies. Instead, he went back to what he knew, the land, the soil, and the people who needed him. York used his fame not for himself, but for others. With the little money he earned from speaking tours, he began building something far greater than monuments, a school. A place for the mountain children who had no books, no teachers, no future beyond the fields. Day after day, he oversaw construction with his own hands, hammering boards, hauling bricks, writing letters for funding. When asked why a war hero was building classrooms instead of enjoying riches, York simply said, "I went to war to end one, and came back to fight another, the war against ignorance." The same hills that once echoed with his hunting rifle now rang with the laughter of children. The same man who once carried a gun now carried chalk and a dream that knowledge, not bullets, would shape the next generation. Alvin York had returned to where it all began. A soldier no more, but a builder of peace. Time has a way of turning men into myths, but Alvin York never wanted to be either. He was not born a hero. He was a farmer, a son, a man of faith, who, when faced with the hardest question of all, chose to listen to his conscience. In the years after his death, his story became more than just a tale of war. It became a lesson, a quiet reminder that courage is not born from anger, but from conviction. American soldiers in later wars carried his name like a prayer. In Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, men spoke of York as proof that one person, guided by belief and humility, could still make a difference. Museums preserve his uniform, historians study his battle maps, and generations visit the hills of Tennessee where he once walked. But his true legacy is not in the medals or the headlines. It's in the idea that faith and duty can coexist, that a man can hate war, yet still fight to end it. York's story is America's paradox, strength born from simplicity, and greatness born from grace. His rifle may be silent, his fields now overgrown, but his example still speaks, to every soul who struggles between belief and responsibility. As the final image fades, the mist rolling once again over the Appalachian hills, the voice returns one last time. From the soil he rose, and to the soil he returned, but his story lives forever.